Meta is expanding its hate speech policy to include the word Zionists. That's right. The word Zionist is now going to be considered part of the hate speech policy for Facebook and Instagram based on the actions of the parent company Meta. They are going to start removing content that attacks Zionists and is not explicitly about the political movement. In a blog post, Meta wrote this: "We will now remove speech targeting Zionists in several areas where our process showed the speech tends to be used to refer to Jews and Israelis with dehumanizing comparisons, calls for harm, or denials of existence." Now, what's the reason behind the change? Well, Meta says they made the decision based on feedback from, quote, global stakeholders, user research, and academic reviews. So here's the thing. Are there people in the world who use Zionist as a proxy for Jews as a way of smuggling in anti-Semitism? Absolutely. They're in the extreme minority, though. People who use Zionist and Jew interchangeably and are using it to disparage Jewish people should be taken off of social media platforms. That is hate speech. We should stop all hate speech. But we also have to analyze the kind of political logics and the movements that are built upon, I'm talking about from Zionists and from the pro-Israel lobby that conflates Judaism and Zionism. The goal of Zionism is to make you think that Judaism and Zionism are the same thing, that Israel is the juridical and geographic embodiment of Judaism, right? So that when you attack Israel, you're attacking Judaism. When you critique Israel, you're critiquing Jews. When you critique Zionism, you're critiquing Jewishness. They want those conflations. So let's not pretend that these conflations are happening out of nowhere. That said, at the end of the day, anti-Semitism has to be repudiated. It cannot be tolerated in any way, form, or fashion. Zionism, however, is a political movement. It is a settler colonial political movement that emerges at the end of the 19th century for the express purpose of colonizing. I'm using their language. I'm using Herzl's language right now. I'm using Jabotinsky's language right now. I'm using the language of the early Yishuv. I'm using the language of the early Zionist movement to come and settle and colonize historic Palestine, what was then Ottoman Palestine and eventually became British Mandate Palestine. This is a fact. So some of the language that they're saying is offensive. Some of the criticisms they're saying that are being levied against Zionism, they're not dehumanizing. They're not evil. Some are. Again, anti-Semitic tropes, anti-Semitic stereotypes, anti-Semitic language should be rejected. But criticizing Zionism as settler colonialism or as racism is not an act of anti-Semitism by any measure except the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA definition, which deliberately casts such a broad and expansive net over the notion of anti-Semitism that any criticism of Israel, any negative analysis of Zionism is considered an act of anti-Semitism. That is morally and politically and logically untenable. So Meta, I don't have a problem with Meta saying we're going to crack down on anti-Semitism. I don't have a problem with Meta saying that we're going to use our complex algorithms to make sure that people aren't smuggling in anti-Semitism under the banner of anti-Zionism. I get that. But that also becomes a convenient excuse to ignore the global outcry for justice in Palestine. It becomes an excuse to not allow for a principled and legitimate critique of Zionism, which is happening around the globe. It leads to more silencing of Palestinian voices. It leads to more silencing of pro-Palestinian voices. It leads to more shadow bans. It leads to more erasure. It leads to more hiding. It leads to these kind of cyber political imbalances that are happening on these social media platforms that make it seem as if there's a unanimity, that there's a single kind of dominant voice that's pro-Israel, when in fact the world is far more complex than that. And social media should allow for that complexity, should allow us to have all of the voices, all of the people speaking, all of the work happening, not just the ones we agree with. Isn't that what they say?